On Thanksgiving, my parents blocked the front door before I could step inside. My father looked straight at me and said, "You're not invited. Go home, behind him." My sister lifted her wine glass. My uncle stared at his plate, and my best friend was sitting in my chair, laughing like she belonged there. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I just nodded, carried my pecan pie back to the car, and made one phone call. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up with 12 missed calls. Then my father left a voicemail, and what he screamed proved they had been afraid of me all along. "My name is Alina Bennett. I was 32 that Thanksgiving, working as a marketing consultant in Boston and trying to build a life that did not depend on my family's approval." From the outside, the Bennetts looked almost perfect. My father, Richard, had spent decades building a respected financial business. My mother, Margaret, knew every charity chairperson, every donor, and every rule that kept our family polished in public. My older sister, Claire, had followed Dad into finance without hesitation. She was disciplined, sharp, and exactly who he wanted a daughter to be. I was the other one. At Sunday dinners, Dad would lean toward Claire and ask about markets, clients, and strategy. When I mentioned a campaign I had led or a difficult client I had saved, he would cut his steak and say, "That sounds creative," in the same tone people use for a child's drawing. My grandmother Evelyn was the only person who never made me feel small. She lived in a quiet house outside the city and kept flower seeds in an old blue tin above her kitchen sink. Every spring, she pressed that tin into my hands and let me choose what we planted. "Kindness is not surrender," she told me once. Brushing soil from my sleeve. Never confuse the two. After she died, I kept her pearl earrings and her pecan pie recipe. I wore the earrings whenever I needed courage. I baked the pie whenever I wanted to believe home could still feel like home. Megan Foster had been my best friend since college. She knew every fight I had with my parents, every doubt I carried. Every night I wondered whether leaving the family business would make me selfish. My family loved her. Mom called her the easy daughter. Dad trusted her. Claire started inviting her to dinners I was never told about. 8 months before that Thanksgiving, I noticed payments that did not match several client statements. I asked Dad about them in his office. He took the papers from my hand so fast the corner sliced my finger. "Stay in marketing. Alina." After that, my access changed. Meetings disappeared from my calendar. Claire took over conversations I had started. Megan kept checking on me, asking exactly what I had seen. 6 months later, I resigned. My mother stopped calling. Claire accused me of betrayal. Dad said I had embarrassed the family. Then, 1 week before Thanksgiving, Mom called. "Dinner is at the usual time," she said. For the first time in months, I let myself believe they wanted me back. I spent that entire week rehearsing apologies I did not owe them. I had no idea the invitation was part of the trap. Thanksgiving morning arrived bright and strangely warm for late November. Sunlight spilled across my kitchen floor while the pecan pie cooled beside the window. The smell of brown sugar and toasted nuts filled the apartment, wrapping around me like a memory I was not ready to question. I dressed carefully. Forest green sweater, camel skirt, low leather boots, Grandma Evelyn's pearl earrings. In the mirror, I looked calm, beautiful, even, but my stomach kept tightening. On the drive across Boston, I practiced safe conversation topics: Claire's latest project, Mom's table setting, Dad's favorite football team, anything except the family business, anything except why they had stopped speaking to me. When I turned onto my parents' street, I saw Megan's car parked near the house. That made me slow down. For years, Megan had ridden with me to Thanksgiving dinner. She would bring coffee, complain about traffic, and steal pieces of crust from the pie before we reached the door. This year, she had not answered my messages. Still, I told myself there had to be an explanation. The brownstone looked exactly as it always did. Candles glowed behind the tall windows. Classical music drifted through the glass. I could smell roasted turkey before I reached the steps. Then I heard laughter. I balanced the pie in one hand and rang the bell. The laughter stopped a few seconds later. The door opened. Dad stood in the center of the entrance. Mom stood beside him, one hand gripping the frame. Neither stepped aside. Hi, I said. Mom told me dinner was at the usual time. Her eyes moved to the pie, then back to my face. There's been a misunderstanding. I gave a nervous laugh. What misunderstanding? Dad's expression did not change. You're not invited. Go home. For 1 second, I could not breathe. Then I looked past them. Claire sat near Dad's chair, wearing burgundy and holding a glass of wine. Uncle David stared down at his plate. He had always told me to think for myself, but he did not move, and Megan was sitting in my chair, the chair beside Claire. She was smiling when I first saw her. The smile disappeared the moment our eyes met. She turned away. I brought Dad's favorite pie, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. We already have dessert, Mom replied. Dad began closing the door. Your choices have consequences. Alina, the wood shut between us, inside. The music rose. A few seconds later, the laughter returned. I stood on the cold steps holding a pie, finally understanding what they had done. They had not forgotten me. They had replaced me. I could have knocked. I could have begged Mom to explain or demanded Megan face me. Instead, I nodded to a closed door and walked away. Because beneath the humiliation, one sentence had surfaced in my mind. Something Daniel had warned me months earlier. If they become afraid of what you know, they will push you out first. The car seat felt cold through my skirt. I placed the pecan pie on the passenger side and sat with both hands locked around the steering wheel, through the windshield. I could still see the dining room windows glowing above the street. Shadows moved behind the curtains. Someone lifted a glass, someone laughed. For a few seconds, I was 9 years old again, wobbling on a bicycle while Dad ran beside me with one hand on the seat. Then I remembered Megan turning away. My chest folded in on itself. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and cried so hard I could barely breathe. Not because of one dinner, not because of one cruel sentence. I cried for every year I had worked to earn a place in that family, and every time they had made me feel grateful for scraps. When the tears finally slowed, Grandma Evelyn's words came back to me. Kindness is not surrender. I wiped my face, picked up my phone, and called Daniel Brooks. He answered on the second ring. Alina. I'm ready, I said. There was a pause. Ready for what? To stop protecting them 3 months earlier. I had shown Daniel a few payments and client statements that did not match. He had warned me the pattern could point to hidden losses, unauthorized transfers, or misuse of family assets. I had refused to take it further. They were still my family then. Now. Daniel's voice became careful. Once I send notice, they will know someone is watching. Are you certain? I looked at the pie beside me, still warm, still untouched. Yes. He told me not to contact anyone, not to post anything, and not to open systems I no longer had permission to access. I agreed. Then he sent a preservation notice to the independent counsel connected to the business. Payments, emails, client statements, trust records. Nothing could be deleted or altered without consequences. I drove to a quiet overlook near the river and set my phone on the dashboard. 19 minutes passed. Then Dad called. Mom called next. Claire sent 6 messages in under a minute. What did you do? Who did you contact? Call us now. Then Megan's name appeared. Please don't make this worse. I almost laughed. My phone rang again. Dad left a voicemail this time. His voice was so loud the speaker crackled. You have no idea what you just started. I did not call back. I went home, opened the locked box where I kept the records I was legally allowed to retain, and spread everything across my table. That was when I found my signature on a financial authorization I had never signed. Nearly $2 million from Grandma Evelyn's trust had been used without my consent. They had not only pushed me out, they had been using my name while they did it. 3 days later, the board placed Dad and Claire on temporary leave while an independent review began. I was at my apartment with Daniel when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw all 4 of them. Dad stood in front, his tie crooked and jaw clenched. Mom looked pale beneath perfect makeup. Claire rubbed her palms against her coat. Megan hovered behind them. I opened the door but did not step aside. If you come in, I said. No shouting, no threats. Dad laughed bitterly. You do not set terms after what you have done. My home, my terms. For once, he had no answer. They entered. Daniel remained at my dining table, a legal pad beside him and the records sealed in a folder. Dad saw him and stopped. So this is your plan. Bring in a lawyer and destroy your family. No. My plan is to stop you from destroying everyone else. Mom flinched. Alina, people are talking. Do you understand what this is doing to us? To us. Dad stepped closer. Those payments were temporary adjustments. We had a difficult year. We moved money to protect clients and employees. You used my signature. His face shifted. Claire looked down. Nearly $2 million from Grandma Evelyn's trust. I continued, an authorization I never signed. Was that temporary too? Mom pressed a hand to her chest. Your father intended to replace it. That is not consent. Claire sank onto my couch. It started with one loss, she said. A major client wanted out. Dad said we needed a few months. We changed numbers, moved funds, covered one gap with another. Claire, Dad snapped. She already knows. He turned on me. You saw a few statements. You have no idea what it takes to keep a business alive. Daniel spoke calmly. Alina raised concerns 8 months ago. We have her emails, calendar changes, and the dates her access was restricted. The timeline is clear. Dad's eyes narrowed. You are framing me. No, I said. I am making sure you cannot frame me. Megan stepped forward. Think about the employees, people with mortgages, kids in college. If this collapses, they lose everything. I stared at her. Where was that concern when you were sitting in my chair? Her mouth opened, then closed. Why were you reporting my conversations to Dad? Megan's eyes filled. Richard promised me your clients and your position if I kept him informed. I told myself I was protecting the business. Then Claire and I... You fell in love? Claire looked away. Megan's voice cracked. Our friendship was real. A real friend does not turn private pain into currency. Dad struck the wall with his palm. Enough. Name your price. The room went still. $5 million, a leadership role, your own division. We restore your name, and this ends. I almost smiled. You still think this is about being invited back? Everyone has a price, he said. Then you never knew me. His face hardened. If you do not cooperate, we will tell investigators you approved those transfers. The door opened behind him. Uncle David stepped inside holding a thick envelope. That will not work. Richard. He placed meeting notes on the table. They showed Dad and Claire ordering staff to restrict my access after my first complaint. David looked at me. I should have spoken sooner. I was afraid of what the truth would cost. Dad stared at his brother. I stood. The independent board has voted to protect the records. My trust shares supported the audit, employee protections, and a repayment plan for clients. You cannot stop it. Dad's anger cracked into fear. All this because of one dinner no. That dinner only showed me what you had already decided I was worth. I opened the door. Megan apologized as she passed. Claire could not meet my eyes. Mom said I would regret this. Dad stopped beside me. You are no longer a Bennett. I held his gaze. You decided that when you closed the door in my face. Then they left. And this time, I was the one who closed the door. The review lasted 9 months. By the time it ended, the polished version of my family had been stripped down to facts, dates, and signatures. Dad had authorized false reports, moved client money without permission, and used nearly $2 million from Grandma Evelyn's trust to cover losses he believed he could fix later. Claire had approved adjustments and repeated numbers she knew were false. Megan had passed along my private conversations and helped isolate me after I started asking questions. The final agreement removed Dad from the business permanently. He had to repay what he had taken, surrender control, and accept a ban from working in finance again. He avoided a long public trial by admitting responsibility and cooperating with the repayment process. When Daniel called to tell me, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at Grandma's blue seed tin. Justice did not feel like fireworks. It felt like finally setting down something heavy. Claire lost her position and returned every bonus connected to the false reports. For months, I heard nothing from her. Then one afternoon, she sent a message asking to meet at the river overlook. She looked smaller when she arrived. No tailored coat, no perfect makeup, just jeans, tired eyes, and both hands wrapped around a paper cup. "I saw you standing outside that door," she said, "and I stayed in my chair." I said nothing. That is the part I cannot excuse. It is the part I cannot forget. She nodded. She did not ask me to forgive her. That mattered. We began meeting once a month. Some conversations lasted an hour. Others ended after 10 minutes. We were not rebuilding the childhood we had lost. We were testing whether two adults could create something more honest from the wreckage. Megan wrote 6 letters. In the last one, she admitted she had wanted Dad's approval, Claire's love, and my trust all at once. She convinced herself she could keep everything without paying a price. I answered once. I told her I no longer hated her, but forgiveness did not mean access. She had crossed a line I would not erase just because she finally understood it. Mom moved to the lake house outside the city. She stopped attending charity events and rarely called. When she did, she spoke about embarrassment, gossip, and how lonely Dad had become. She never asked how lonely I had been on those steps. Uncle David cooperated fully and helped protect employees who had known nothing about the fraud. He later told me silence had been the most expensive choice of his life. The trust money was restored. I did not use it to take over the business. I voted for independent leadership, stronger oversight, and a repayment program for clients. Then I returned to marketing. Only now. Part of my work helped an organization support employees who reported abuse and retaliation. I knew what it felt like to be told that telling the truth made you disloyal. One year after that Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner in my new home in Cambridge. The chairs did not match. The turkey came out dry. Rachel spilled cider before anyone sat down. Nobody cared. Emily brought flowers. Daniel and his wife brought bread. David arrived with the old blue seed tin I thought had been lost. Claire came last. She stood outside holding a pecan pie for a few seconds. Neither of us moved. Then I opened the door wider. Near the end of dinner, my phone lit up with a message from Mom. "Is there still a place for me someday?" I read it twice. Then I turned the phone face down and looked around my table. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. This time, I would decide who came through the door. I used to think family meant staying loyal, no matter how much it hurt. Now I know real love does not demand silence, obedience, or sacrifice without limits. I did not win because my father lost everything. I won because I stopped letting fear decide who deserved access to my life. The pecan pie sat in the center of my table, and the door behind me stayed open for the people who had earned their place. Have you ever had to protect yourself from your own family? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one.